This is a True Crime Friday special that covers the life and crimes of Charles Manson and the Manson family, the crimes they committed. This is a true crime segment. I'm not glorifying these crimes or the people involved. This is purely out of curiosity for the psychology and for historical reasons. This stream will have mentions of cults, murder, grooming, sexual abuse, rape, and child murder. If you are not comfortable with the subject at hand, then this may not be the stream for you. Donations made during this segment get donated to charities that help victims of true crime. Pictures of the criminals and victims might be shown, but not the images from the actual crime scenes. Those are available online if you do want to see them, but I would not recommend it. So this is a very big one. This is a very big section of the stream, to say the least. There's a lot to be mentioned throughout this entire thing. So we're going to be going into, obviously, Charles Manson. We're going to be going into the things that he did, his life, till like 3 p.m. God knows, it's going to be going on for quite a fucking long time. So let's just get on with it, I guess. So Charles Miles Manson was born on the 12th of November 1943 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a 15-year-old redhead runaway named Kathleen Maddox. His father was Colonel Scott. His father was a labourer married to another woman, so there's a bit of an affair. Make this a white person special. There's a lot of fucked up shit. So shortly after having Charles, Kathleen married a man named Manson with the last name Manson, giving her son his name Charles Manson. But also, can we also comment on the fact that when he was actually born, before she got with this guy that had the last name Manson, she actually didn't have a name for Charles at first. So when he was, for quite a long time after he was born, on his birth certificate, his actual birth certificate, like the original one, actually does say no name Maddox. She didn't want to give her child a name, which is pretty fucked up. So at first, he just didn't have a name. On his birth certificate, he has no name at all. Like, legal documents, there's nothing there. Kathleen was from Ashland, Kentucky, and she was the youngest born to a devout religious couple. She was impulsive and rebellious. She'd run off to the big city not long before getting pregnant. She was at best a juvenile delinquent, and at worst she was also an alcoholic, and she was also a sex worker. She was a neglectful mother by all accounts. Once she actually gave Charles away, but she didn't give him away just like, oh, well, she can't take care of him kind of thing. She actually gave Charles away because she gave Charles away in exchange for a pint of beer. No, it's a pitcher of beer. She gave him away for a pitcher of beer, which drinkies for the Twinkies buddy, Alec. It's kind of monster, but so she left Charlie with the waitress for several days. The marriage to her husband, who was only known as Manson, did not last. She continued to party and run and pretty much be on the run from the law, basically, because she committed a lot of crimes. But she was arrested for armed robbery, a crime that she committed with her brother Luther. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and her son was given to her sister for quite a few years. 2K to go for Panda Shake. I do not have my onesie, so I don't know how this is going to go, Panda Shake-wise. Be interesting. So his aunt Glenda and her husband Bill Thomas lived in West Virginia with their daughter Joanne, who was 3 years older than Charles Manson. Where they lived was a small mining town south of Wheeling, close enough to the prison in Mountsville, which is where Kathleen was serving her sentence. Glenna and Bill wanted Charlie to see his mother as frequently as possible. Charles Manson later wrote that the big stones were like the temple of sullen place. I never realized I could spend my life in such temples of suffering. The Thomases tried to provide Charlie with a stable home life, but Charlie had two issues working on against him. First, everyone knew about his birth without a father, so they always knew he was illegitimate. His mother's criminal activity and viewed him as a nuisance. Second, Charlie was a pathological liar, even at the age of 5, and he was apparently quite selfish. He was tiny, and he tried to basically be charmful, but no one was really buying it. Everyone just thought he was pretty much just a weird kid, and that he was basically a dickhead, which he really was. Bill Thomas was a hard-drinking man who worked for the railroad. He thought Charlie needed to toughen up. When Charlie ran from home crying from his first day of school, his uncle was disgusted. Not with the fact that he had a bad day at school, but the way Charlie basically was crying. The fact that Charlie was crying was basically a big no-no. Manson got into trouble for skiving from school and petty theft, although there was a lack of foster home placements. And in 1947, at the age of 13... Oh, sorry, I've got his birthday completely wrong. But either way, in 1947, at the age of 13, he was placed in the Gaalton School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, which was a school for basically male delinquents, and it was all run by Catholic priests. So you probably know where this is going to go. Hate to be a stereotype, but you kind of, if I'm going to say Catholic priest, you should probably think of, oh wait, yeah, I know where this is going to go. So it's a very strict school where punishment for even the tiniest little thing would include beatings with either a wooden paddle or a leather strap, which was quite common for the time in most schools. Manson ran away from the school and slept in the woods, under bridges, and wherever else he could find shelter, because it was that horrible. He ran back home to his mother and spent Christmas with his auntie and uncle. His mother returned him to the school, and 10 months later, he ran away to Indianapolis. And in Indianapolis, Manson committed his first known crime by robbing a grocery store. At the first robbery, he was simply to find something to eat. However, Manson found a cigar box containing just over $100, which is it's a lot of money now, but it's also a lot of money then. He took the money. He used the money to rent a room on an Indianapolis Skid Row and to buy food. Dicks. For a time, Charles Manson tried to go straight by getting a job delivering messages for the Western Union. However, he quickly began to supplement his wages through petty theft. He was eventually caught, and in 1949, a sympathetic judge sent him to Boys Town, a juvenile facility in Omaha. After 4 days at Boys Town, a fellow student, Blackie Nelson, got hold of a gun and stole a car. They used it to commit 2 armed robberies, and on their way to the home of Nelson's uncle in Illinois, Nelson's uncle was a professional thief, and when the boys arrived, he allegedly took them on as apprentices, which is a very weird way to be an apprentice, is by basically being an apprentice to a thief. Did not know that was a thing, but okay. Manson was arrested 2 weeks later during a nighttime raid of a store. In the investigation that followed, he was linked to his 2 earlier armed robberies, and he was sent to the Indiana Boys School, which was a strict reform school. And if anyone knows anything about reform schools, they're not the most pleasant of places. At the school, other students allegedly raped Manson with the encouragement of a staff member, and he was repeatedly beaten. He ran away from the school 18 times, and while at the school, Manson developed a self-defense technique he later called the insane game. Where he was physically unable to defend himself, he would screech, grimace, and wave his arms to convince aggressors that he was insane. This carries on through pretty much his entire life. I don't know if anyone's ever watched any interviews with him, but he would go from just talking and answering the questions in a weird way, basically the way he normally would do. It just acts really odd. But then eventually he would start screeching, making weird noises, and dancing around and waving his arms around. If you watch any interviews, he just randomly jumps up and does that. After a number of failed attempts, he escaped with 2 other boys in February of 1951. The 3 escapees were robbing a stolen car across state lines. Manson was sent to Washington, D.C.'s National Training School for Boys, and on arrival, he was given aptitude tests, which determined he was illiterate. Yeah, he definitely was. But had an above-average IQ of 109. So he was fairly smart, considering of what everything he's gone through, but he just was illiterate, which, yeah. His caseworker deemed him as aggressively antisocial, and I feel like that is how most people would describe me most of the time. So his first time in prison is what we're going to talk about now. So on a psychiatrist's recommendation, Manson was transferred in October of 1951 to National Bridge Honor Camp. It was a minimum security prison, so his aunt visited him quite a bit and told administrators she would let him stay at her house and would help him find work. So she was really trying to get him on the right path and trying to make sure that he would have a good life. But obviously, I think at this point, with how his childhood had already gone, he was too far gone at this point. He could have been saved, but he was always going to turn out, I think, very, very odd regardless. I got a message. So he had a parole hearing scheduled for February of 1952. However, in January, he was caught raping a boy at knife point. Manson was transferred to the Federal Reformatory of Petersburg, Virginia, where he committed a further 8 serious disciplinary offences, 3 involving homosexual acts. Basically, we don't know if those other ones, other than the rape that we obviously know that he did at knife point, we don't know if the other ones were consensual or not, but if they were, basically, he was done for having sex with a guy. Or raping a guy, one of the two. If he was raping, then fair enough, get him in shit for it. But if it was just having consensual sex, then whatever. No one really knows. He was then moved to a maximum security reformatory in Ohio, where he was expected to remain until his release on his 21st birthday in November 1955. So he was really on good behaviour, led to an early release in May 1954 to live with his aunt and uncle. And in January 1955, he got married to a hospital waitress named Rosalie Jean Willis. And around October, about 3 months after him and his pregnant wife arrived in Los Angeles in a car he had stolen in Ohio. Thank you, Ron says, you've been here for 4 months. All the best, have a great day, BT. Manson life is a sick story. It is a very sick story, and because you have announced that you've been here for 4 months, we're going to blow up another balloon. Let's do it. The balloons still get blown up, regardless. Yeah, Manson life is a sick story. When I was reading about it, I was just like, his life was just not going to go well, regardless. Oh, long, Jesus Christ, that's gone by quick, hasn't it? That's another balloon below. Are you not in work today? Because I'm pretty sure it's not lunchtime there yet. This is when I struggle because I've got so much caffeine in my system. To try to not on a balloon. That'll do. There we go, another balloon. That could have knocked so much over. You know what to say? Oh, good. Same. Love it. I was never going to be at work on my birthday. Could not pay me. So, where were we? So yeah, he married a woman named Rosalie Jean Willis. After like a few months, he got her pregnant, and they went. Wales holiday. Oh, lovely, 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 lovely. Have a fun. Oh, yeah, a good holiday. So yeah, he stole a car in Ohio, and they drove to Los Angeles. Manson was again charged with a federal crime for taking the vehicle across state lines, not for stealing it. Okay. After a psychiatric evaluation, he was given 5 years of probation. He failed to appear at a hearing in LA on an identical charge filed in Florida, resulted in his March 1956 arrest in Indianapolis. So he was arrested again. His probation was revoked and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison at Terminal Island, San Pedro, California. So while he was in prison, Rosalie gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr., during his first year at Terminal Island. He received visits from Rosalie and his mother, who were now living together in Los Angeles, to be closer to him. In March 1957, when the visits from his wife sighed to ease, his mother informed him Rosalie was living with another man, so the marriage did not last long. Less than 2 weeks before a scheduled parole hearing, Manson tried to escape by stealing a car, and he was given 5 years probation, but his parole was denied. So this is the thing that you're gonna notice a lot. He has quite a few kids. This happens quite a fair amount of time. I think he ends up having at least 5 kids or more, and a lot of them, yes, are living normal lives by all accounts, but they are Charles Manson kids and probably don't actually know that they are his kid. I can imagine whoever got called Charles Manson, the child that got called Charles Manson Jr. probably has had the name changed since then. So there's a lot of people who probably do know that Charles Manson is their dad, but there's also a lot of people who don't. That are definitely probably still with us today. So Manson got 5 years parole in September 1958, the same year in which Rosalie received a decree of divorce. So they got divorced in 1958. By November, he was pimping a 16-year-old girl and was receiving additional support from the girl with wealthy parents. In September 1959, he pleaded guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check, which he claims to have stolen from a mailbox. So, minor crimes here or there, but obviously the really extreme crimes with the pimping kind of thing. The charge was later dropped and he received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation after a young woman named Leona, who had an arrest record for sex work, made a tearful plea before the court that she and Manson were deeply in love and she would marry him if he was freed. 12 Hour Street, no way you're lying 100%. We've been live since 8 o'clock this morning, so I'm definitely not lying. So if he was free, she said that she would marry him. Before the year was up, Leona did marry Charles Manson, possibly so she could not be required to testify against him. So he has been married at this point twice. He took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for purposes of sex work, resulting in him being held and questioned for violating the Mann Act, although he was soon released. He correctly suspected that the investigation had not ended, and when he disappeared in violation of his probation, a bench warrant was issued. So this all happened in April 1960. Following the arrest of one of the women for sex work, Manson was arrested in June in Texas and was returned to Los Angeles. For violating his probation on the check cashing charge, he was ordered to serve his 10-year sentence. Obviously, this did not happen. He didn't get a 10-year sentence. So he actually spent a year trying to unsuccessfully appeal for his probation. And in July 1961, he was transferred from the Los Angeles County Jail to the United States Penitentiary in Washington. So there he took guitar lessons, which is where this all begins, basically. When he starts taking guitar lessons, this is when everything starts to form. Weird how that happens. So according to Jen Guinness's 2013 biography of Manson, his mother moved to Washington State to be closer to him during his incarceration, working nearby as a waitress to basically make sure he was okay. Very, very weird considering the fact that she tried to abandon him when he was a newborn, but okay. Although the Mann Act charge had been dropped, the attempt to cash the Treasury check was still a federal offence, and Manson's September 1961 annual review noted he had a tremendous drive to call attention to himself. Well, that's a fucking understatement. An observation echoed in September 1964, and in 1963, Leona was granted a divorce, so again, that marriage did not last long. During the process, she alleged she and Manson had a son, Charles Luther, and according to a popular urban legend, Manson auditioned unsuccessfully for the Monkees in late 1965, and this basically refuted by the fact that Manson was still in prison at McNeil Island at the time. So basically a lot of things that he says happened did not happen. Basically in terms of trying to get into show business, a lot of things he said he did didn't actually happen. in terms of that thing, because he was trying to become famous. He wanted to go into showbiz after he got out of prison. In June 1966, Manson was sent for the second time to Terminal Island in preparation for early release. By the time of his release day on the 21st of March 1967, he had spent more than half of his 32 years of life in prisons and other institutions. This was mainly because he had broken federal laws, federal sentences, fairly bunch of other things. He actually said when he was getting released that he didn't want to be released. He said he just didn't want that. So the reason why he said he didn't want to be released is because he'd spent most of his life in prison. Which is true, he did. He spent most of his life in behind bars. So he said he didn't want to be released. He just wanted to stay in prison, playing his guitar, going about his business, because he felt like he didn't know what to do on the outside world. He felt like he didn't know how to basically live a normal life other than committing crimes to get put back in prison, which is really sad if you think about it in that way, but also I can't have too much sympathy for him at the same time based on the things that he did. So now we're going to go into beginning his infamous cult. So after being discharged from prison in 1967, he began attracting a group of followers, mostly young women from around California. They would later be known as the Manson family. The core members of the Manson group included Charles Tex Watson, I hate this last name, I can never say this last name, Robert Buscelli, I'm going to say that's it. Mary Brunner, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, and also Squeaky Fromm. Squeaky Fromm is actually the first person that will come into the family. Her actual name is Lynette Fromm, but after interacting with Manson, he gave her the nickname Squeaky. The reason why he calls her Squeaky is very, very weird. Apparently, it's a noise that she would constantly make around Manson. She'd just squeak all the time, which is also very, very odd. So we're going to go into the lives of the Manson family, each individual member, and how they came into contact with him, because it's all very bizarre and how it all began. So Lynette, Lynette Fromm is mostly known as being a criminal who was a member of the Manson family. She was born in Santa Monica, California on the 22nd of October 1948 to middle-class parents. She was basically a very typical American girl. She was very sweet, apparently. She enjoyed playing outside with her friends and being quite active. She was part of a dance group, and in the late 1950s, the dance group was called the Westchester Lariats. They began touring the US and Europe, actually, so she was getting quite popular. They traveled to Los Angeles to perform on the Lawrence Welk Show, and later to Washington, D.C. to perform at the White House. So she was very, very... She basically could have lived such a good life if she never would have met Charles Manson. I'm trying to make sure that everything is actually in focus, because I feel like it's not. I don't know, I'm kind of paranoid about the camera right now. If it looks weird and it doesn't look like it's actually working too well, then let me know. So the good girl personality didn't actually last too long. In 1963, when she was 14 years old, her parents moved to Redondo Beach in California. She quickly fell with the wrong crowd as she got a bit older. She began drinking, using quite a bit of drugs, but this was quite common in the 60s. Before long, her grades started to slip and she found herself suffering from depression. And if you had depression at the time, you didn't really get any help. Not help that benefited you anyway. She was in her first year of college when her father, who was an engineer, kicked her out, apparently, because she was presumptuous and insubordinate. Okay. By 1967, she was homeless, depressed, and looking for an escape. So you're so pretty. Thank you! Oh my god, thank you. It's Angel Was Here. Hello, how are you doing today? And thank you so much. And thank you for the follow. That's gonna sound so fucking annoying. I apologize deeply, but that is what we're doing today. So, Charles Manson tends to prey on the vulnerable. So obviously all these people that he does come into contact with are vulnerable at the time of meeting him. They might have had a very good life beforehand, and then he just tips it over even more. How are you doing today, Angel? I'm going to call you Angel if that's okay. Short but sweet. So Charles Manson found Lynette on the shores of Redondo Beach in 1967, not long after he got out of prison. Despite the fact that he just recently been released from prison, Squeaky Fromm became absolutely obsessed with him. She fell in love with him based on his attitude and the way he viewed life. She later called him a once-in-a-lifetime soul, and she just basically was very attached to him. Criminal cases are really good depending on the case. So we're covering Charles Manson and the Manson family today, because we thought we'd do a really big one for the 12-hour stream. How about you? I'm doing really good. I'm really happy today. It's my birthday, and I'm in a very good mood. We've got balloons everywhere. We've got a ball pit. If you're wondering what I'm sat in a coffin-shaped ball pit. I am vibing today, and I hope you're having a very good I hope you're having a very good day, Angel. I am bad with speaking. So he said to her that you basically got to start somewhere, you got to be free, you got to do what you want, kind of thing, and she became obsessed with that. Within days, she became a Manson family member. She's actually one of the first Manson family members. Thank you so much, Angel. Thank you. I am 23. I'm very old today. We're getting out of age. She travelled with Manson by just those two at first, and they became friends, and they also managed to pick up fellow family members, Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner, very quickly. But the one member that she didn't like at all was Patricia Krenwinkel, and we'll go into that as well. I truly love your hair. Oh, thank you so much! I've recently re-dyed it. I think I re-dyed it last week because it really needed a touch-up, so it's more pink now. It used to be more red, and today it's actually a lot more pink. But thank you! So, Mary Brunner was the next family member to join. Mary was born on the 17th of December 1943 in Wisconsin. Wait, what are you reading? We're reading... I've got all the research about Charles Manson. I've been gathering this research for about a month now, and I'm basically teaching you all about Charles Manson. It's a thing that we do on Fridays, True Crime Fridays, and it's no different. Even though it's my birthday, we're still going to do it. So I thought we'd do Charles Manson because we're going to be here for quite a while. So what did they do? That's what we're going to go into. So we're talking about their individual lives, how they were before they met Charles Manson, and obviously what they would later go on to do. So Mary Brunner went by many, many names. Hello, back in Ocean Time for Manson segment. Yes, you are. So Mary Brunner went by many different names. She went by Mariette, Arch, Mother Mary, Mary Manson, Linda D. Manson, and Christine Mary X. No idea why. They just gave each other very random nicknames. In April 1968... it doesn't really say what her life was like before. She was quite normal. She had a pretty normal life. So in April 1968, after meeting Charles Manson, she gave birth to his second child. Apparently third child. The second one is not fully confirmed. It's a kind of possibility that is his child, but it's not actually fully confirmed. But this is his alleged third child, who they named Valentin Michael Manson. She was later convicted of a shootout, which we will get into. Fortunately for child Valentine, they named him Pooh Bear. His nickname was Pooh Bear. So she actually met Charles Manson when Manson was 33 and on parole from his last arrest. She was one of the first. She was very vulnerable at the time. She allowed him to move into her apartment. Milk. And the two of them became a little bit of a couple, despite the fact of Squeaky also being there. She quit her job that she had at the time, and they just went around California in a van and recruited other women along with Squeaky. And that's when she got pregnant, so it was very, very quick after meeting. After that, they picked up Patricia Krenwinkel. So Patricia was born in Los Angeles. Are you tired? I'm actually not. I've still got quite a bit of energy. I mean, we've only been going since 8 a.m. It's actually not... We've been going for like 3 and a bit hours. The plastic balls are getting on my nerves. I won't lie to you. They're getting on my right fucking nerves. So Patricia Krenwinkel was born in Los Angeles, California on the 3rd of December 1947. Her father worked in insurance and her mother was a homemaker. Patricia had her older half-sister grow up in a suburban working-class neighborhood, so she had a very, very good life at the start. She was considered to be very, very close to her dad, so she's a bit of a daddy's girl. Her mother was a former Southern belle. She was socialist and she was very, very charitable, so it was a very, very nice family by all accounts. She was an animal lover. She had many pets during her childhood, such as dogs, birds, hamsters, and she was in the Little Wildlife Society. Her childhood had some family troubles, including her parents' unhappy marriage, but other than that, like, they completely adored her as well. She did quote by saying that she said, "My father wanted all my attention. I was the object in a wicked game of vengeance with my mother, bounced across the table in the centre of every argument," which is actually quite sad. You still, yeah, I think they're classing that as long COVID, where I know quite a few people still haven't got it back. Hopefully you will get it back eventually, but hopefully it's soon, because I can imagine that being a right pain. So her father had a stepdaughter called Charlene, who became demanding and attention-seeking, and developed an early addiction to heavy narcotics by her teens. Patricia was bullied in school. She was a fairly bigger child. She wasn't like overweight, but she was more of a plus size. She was quite curvy as a child. But obviously around this time, like, yeah, it was very shitty like it is now. She grew up quite shy, so she actually didn't really like herself at all. She was very insecure throughout her entire life. She had a lot of body hair, which she was very sensitive about, and during her teens, her parents divorced, and Pat and her mother moved to Alabama. She hated it. She didn't like Alabama at all, in the slightest. She returned to LA to live with her father and attend university and high school. After high school, she moved back to Alabama, enrolling in a teacher's course. And after one semester, she decided she didn't want to be a teacher anymore. So she dropped out and returned to LA, where she moved in with her sister and landed a job as a claims clerk at an insurance company. Social life centered around a group of Marines who were stationed at Camp Pendleton. She dated a couple of them, and she was drinking buddies with all of them. She started to drink a bit more. She started to do a bit of drugs. The Vietnam War was a major influence in the lives of Charles Manson's followers, which was happening around the time. So, yeah, it was a reason, the Vietnam War was a reason for a lot of Charles Manson's views eventually, and why he went by a lot of things and convinced his followers of these things. They started taking LSD quite quickly. LSD takes a major part in this entire thing. She said that she was smoking a lot of marijuana, hash, and already used LSD a couple times. At that time, drinking and using drugs did not seem unusual because I was doing it with my high school friends. She was quoted on saying in early 1990s during an interview. So Patricia was a religious person who found comfort in the idea of an all-knowing God. She could quote passages and verses from the Bible without having to read the Bible. She just knew it off by heart. When she met Charles Manson, she had that job as a clerk, and she had her own drug problems, and it was just escalating quite a lot. Pat was the only responsible one in the household. Apparently, she was codependent, but also suffering from low self-esteem. She was, in what he would say, she was ripe for the picking. Apparently, when she met Charles Manson, and he knew exactly what to say to her to convince her to go into the family. He said to her, "You should never be ashamed of your body," and she couldn't believe it because she said that she'd always been ashamed of her body. No one had ever called her beautiful, and she started to cry. See, plural of man. What? Patricia thought that she had not only met the man of her dreams, but she'd just begun a serious relationship, and she was shocked when a day later, Manson introduced her to Mary and Lynn, aka Squeaky, at a party. But she swallowed her pride and pretended nothing was wrong with her sharing her new man with 2 other women. If that's what floats your boat, that's what floats your boat. So, watching Pat hurtling closer to Charlie as he played guitar, Lynn thought the other woman seemed sad and frustrated with her life, so she took Pat for a walk on the beach and told her about the gardener and their life of freedom, love, and acceptance. Pat and Lyndon then discovered that they briefly attended the same high school, cementing their bond, and Lynette encouraged Pat to join them, but apparently later on their friendship would kind of fizzle, actually. 3 days later, Pat abandoned her car, sister, nephew, job, and apartment to join Charlie and the other women. As had been shared in other publications, she left behind her final paycheck when she quit her job, but bought a gas credit card which her father continued to pay for the next 2 years. So she bought a credit card so that they'd be able to carry on traveling around, that her dad would pay for. I doubt he knew what they were actually using it for. Come on, Clem. Lynette said Charlie asked us if Patty could come along, and the truth was that she just fit. Oh, I got another message. Just message me. Okay, mine's going to be a little bit late, but that's also cool. That's fine. Let me just let him know that that's fine. Tis cool. Tis cool. Oh, thank you for being here, Angel. No problem. Thank you so much. So, very, very slowly but surely, Mary, Lynn, and Pat began to lose their kind of sanity and their sense of self, and just basically everything that they stood for anyway. So, next person to join the family would become Charles Manson's right-hand man. Got another message. I'm going to open this door now because it's getting really, really warm in here. If I can open it, fucking hell. I've got all the plastic balls stuck to me. Yeah, there we go. The gardening has ended. Fucking hell. So, Charles Denson, aka Tex Watson, was born in Farmersville, Texas on the 2nd of December 1945. He grew up nearby Copperville. No idea what that is. He was the youngest of 3 children. He grew up attending the Copperville Methodist Church, and he went to Farmersville High School. It reminds me of that fucking old Facebook game. Watson was an honor student, editor of the school paper, captain of the football team, and set a state record for high hurdles. So he was a very good student. He was a very good person by all accounts. In September 1964, he moved to Denton, Texas to attend the University of North Texas, where he became a member of the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity. So he was actually a really good student. When funds ran low, he took a job with Brunner Airlines as a baggage handler. He got free flights as a perk, which was a perk of the job, and he flew to Los Angeles about 8 times in 2 months to visit an old fraternity brother. While he was there, he became obsessed with the hippie life on the West Coast, which is at the time was quite common. A lot of people just became obsessed with it. It was around that time. He decided to actually move there, which is where he met Charles Manson. So he attended Cal State Los Angeles with the idea that he'd finish earning his degree, but he dropped out less than a semester of being there to enjoy life in the fast lane, to basically go into the hippie lifestyle. He got a job selling wigs and got his fraternity buddy David Neal a job at the same store. One evening, though, he was driving and he picked up a hitchhiker. So he is quoted on saying later on in his life, hitchhikers were pretty common on Sunset, and I pulled over to pick up a hitchhiker. When he told me his name was Dennis Wilson, it didn't mean anything to me, but when he said he was one of the Beach Boys, I was impressed. So if you are not familiar with the rock group the Beach Boys, give them a Google. But basically the drummer from the Beach Boys was a hitchhike. He was hitchhiking one night, God knows why, and Tex Watson picked him up and took him to his home on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. And when he got there, Charles Manson was actually already there. They'd already had a connection, which we will eventually go into. So Watson was shocked when he pulled up. The place was absolutely massive. It was different from a modest home that he had in Texas, and he was even more surprised when Wilson let him come in. And in the living room, he actually saw Charles Manson sitting on the floor with his guitar, surrounded by 5 or 6 young women. And they all got absolutely stoned, apparently. They all just took a lot of drugs that night, and they were just hooked. They were hooked. Tex was just hooked, not on the drugs, but on Manson himself, which is, I don't get it, but fair. He's quoted on saying, "Here I was, accepting in a world I'd never dreamed about, mellow and at my ease. Charlie murmured in the background something about love, finding love, letting yourself love. I suddenly realized that this was what I was looking for." Hello, Alex. Thank you so much. Not my parents, my brother and my sister hadn't loved me, but somehow now that didn't count. I wanted that kind of love they talked about in the songs, the kind of love that didn't ask you to be anything, didn't judge what you were, didn't set up any rules or regulations. So Manson's family also turned to LSD, regular acid trips, combined with Manson's bizarre teachings. This led to very strange behaviour that started to draw attention to the group. Can't stick around, I'm working, but wanted to come to happy birthday. Oh, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for popping by. I'm getting stuck to this fucking pool. The regret of the ball pit is starting to set in. But I'm committed. I am very much committed. In November 1968, Tex Watson moved in with Manson and his followers at Spahn Ranch, which was a rundown movie set. This is where Watson got his nickname George. This is where Watson got his nickname of Tex. Just because bloody hell, I missed it. We're still doing it. We're still talking about it. We're only talking about the members right now. We've not gone into what they've done yet, so you've not missed it. But I am recording it, so do not worry. The guy who owned the ranch, George Spahn, he was 80 years old, and he was actually pretty much blind, but he gave Charles Watson the nickname Tex based on his Texas accent, which, fair enough. Manson used the term helter-skelter, borrowed from a Beatles song, to describe a coming race war between black and white people. Now, according to him, all his family had to do was burrow underneath Death Valley and wait out the battle, and emerge as the only remaining white people and heir the apparent two human legacies. So there's a lot of racism in this. You're doing so well, thank you, Milk. The next person to join the family was Leslie Louise Van Houten. Leslie is the one that talks quite a bit on interviews. She's got quite a few interviews. She has actually recently applied for parole, which got denied. I want to put that out there. So Leslie Louise Van Houten was born on the 23rd of August 1949 in Los Angeles, California. Her and her older brother grew up in a typical middle-class household. Her father, Paul, was an automotive auctioneer, and her mother, Jane, was a school teacher. After Leslie, there were 2 more children added to the Van Houtens. They adopted a young boy and a girl that had been orphaned in Korea. And in 1963, Leslie's parents sadly divorced. Her dad moved out, and the children stayed with their mum. Meanwhile, Leslie began attending Monrovia High School, where she was twice elected homecoming queen. Wait, your hair is dyed? Yeah. Well, I've just touched it up. I've just touched it up a little bit. I've just dyed it pink. So, like many people at the time, she discovered hallucinogenic drugs, and her grades soon started to slip a bit. She drifted away from her extracurricular activities, and shortly after, she actually got pregnant, but she did have an abortion. So, unfortunately, that's what happened to her. After she graduated high school in 1967, so she actually is the youngest family member at the time, Leslie moved in with her father and began attending a business college, studying to become a legal secretary. She began gravitating towards spiritualism and planned to live in a Yodic spiritualism community. Yes, do it. So in summer of 1968, Leslie was visiting friends in San Francisco when she met Catherine Scher, Bobby Buscelli, and his wife Gail. She began traveling with them for a bit, and in September they took her to meet Charles Manson at Spawn's movie ranch. She left the ranch, but she came back 3 weeks later, and she never left. She rang her mother to say she was dropping out and not be making contact with her ever again. Manson actually used to have full control over them. He decided when they would eat, sleep, and have sex, and when and who they would be having sex with. He also controlled the taking of LSD, giving followers larger doses than himself. According to Manson, when you take LSD enough times, you reach a state of nothing and no thought. Now, according to Van Houten, she became saturated in acid and could not grasp the existence of those living a non-psychedelic reality. So she couldn't understand people who didn't take acid, which is a very weird thought to have. So next we're going on to the next family member, which was Steve Clem Grogan. So Steve Dennis Clem Grogan was born on the 13th of July 1951. He is an American. He was obviously a part of the Manson family as well. Grogan was a troubled and difficult child growing up, and when his frustrated parents lost hope, they decided to drop him off at Spahn Ranch. So he was there straight from the get-go. He was taken in the ranch in by the ranch hands and began to do odd jobs around there. One of the guys there, Donald Shaw Ishii, took a liking to Grogan and offered buying him stuff to make sure that he had everything that he needed. So he kind of just took him under his wing and took care of him. After dropping out of high school, Steve roamed the communes of California, eventually ending up at Spawn's movie ranch at spring in 1967. So basically, he decided to actually full on living there. He was apparently a talented musician, but he had a criminal record, which included small-time crimes such as disturbing the peace and possession of marijuana. Very just minor crimes, I'm pretty sure. He joined the Manson family when they moved to Spawn's Ranch in the spring of 1968. During the days, the family hung around the Beach Boys. Steve actually crashed Dennis Wilson's uninsured Ferrari while riding it through the roads outside of Spawn Ranch, and while many of the ranch viewed Clem as like a smart guy. A lot of the other ones felt he was a bit thick and felt that he was just constantly playing dumb to try and entertain people, which fair enough, it's not hurting anyone, but he did crash Dennis Wilson's car, which I find really funny as a fact. The next family member was Linda Kasabian, who was born in Biddleford, Maine on the 21st of June 1943. She is a key witness, actually, to a lot of the crimes. She was the one who basically kind of gave them up. She grew up in the New England town of Milford, New Hampshire. Her father was Rosary Drune. He was a construction worker of French-Canadian ancestry, and her mother, Joyce Taylor, was a homemaker. The Kasabian family struggled financially, and her parents often didn't get along. This seems to be a recurring thing with every single person who joins the family. Her father abandoned them when Linda was still a child. Both of her parents remarried a short time later. Friends, neighbours and teachers described Linda as intelligent and a good student. However, she dropped out of high school and ran away from home at the age of 16 due to increasing problems with her stepfather, who she claimed mistreated her and her mother. Linda headed to the western states, supposedly looking for God, apparently. At the age of 16, Linda married Robert Peelsley and divorced a short time later. She briefly moved to Miami and tried to reconnect with her father, who was tending a bar, but they drifted apart for a long time. She then moved to Boston, remarried a guy called Robert Kasabian, and gave birth to a daughter in 1968. So she's got a kid. She's been married twice. Her second marriage didn't work, and her daughter and her baby daughter Tanya returned to New Hampshire to live with Linda's mother. So she abandoned her child very early on in her daughter's life. Her current husband Robert Kasabian contacted her asking if she'd meet him in Los Angeles. He wanted her to join him and his friend Charles Manson on a sailing trip to South America. I know, there's a lot of stuff going on. Linda returned to live with Robert in Topanga Canyon, and by the time she was pregnant with her second child, Linda was feeling rejected. Robert had left her behind for a South American trip. He had promised to bring her on, but he never did. A friend of hers by the name Catherine Scher described a nice ranch where a group of hippies were establishing a paradise to escape the social turmoil they anticipated. She was intrigued and decided with her daughter to follow Gypsy to Spahn Ranch, and that's where she met her godlike figure, Charles Manson. Godlike figure. Okay. Their first journey after Pat joined was... So basically, the family, we're going to go into it now. This is everything that happened as a collective. And everything that leads up to the murders, basically. So... Oh god, I'm very uncomfortable on this thing. This thing is just literally a whole heap of mess. Okay, so the first journey after Pat joined was to Reno. I'm gonna say Reno. There, while they were there, Charles Manson visited a brothel and experimented with getting the girls to work for him. The experience was unpleasant and it kind of caused a lot of issues. Charlie actually gave up the whole trying to pimp these girls off, and they went back on the road. Their ongoing journeys took them to Carson City in October, and then to Sacramento, where they traded their VW microbus for a yellow school bus. Because they needed more room. Now the yellow school bus, you might have noticed if you've watched a few movies before about Charles Manson, especially like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's another one on Netflix about Charles Manson's child. Okay, sweet. The school bus is quite prominent in a lot of the things about him. So the women actually removed the seats to make more room for mattresses. They decided to make it more of an actual living space. They changed the school bus they changed the yellow part of the school bus to make it black. It wasn't a popular color around the time, and it's because they eventually got quite a lot of strange looks for it. But Pat was quoted on saying that it wasn't so strange in 1967 to drive a bus where you might have had someone say, "Don't you think what you're doing is odd?" Instead, they were always in places where people were saying, "Wow, can I join you?" And it became the in thing to become so bizarre, to go against everything you'd ever been taught. So apparently, they were quite popular. Later, the bus was furnished with a stove, sink, and a water tank that was stored on top, so they could live for quite a long time in the bus. So it was actually quite a pleasant time before everything started to escalate. So right now, they're not really causing any issues. They're just living out a very happy, hippie lifestyle in a rundown old school bus, which they renovated, which I've noticed a lot of people do that nowadays now. Like, people are renovating buses and stuff like that to live in and travel everywhere. So realistically, at this point, they're not doing anything odd. In the fall, the anticipation of making contacts in the recording industry started to kick off. Charlie was approved to transfer his parole to Los Angeles, and the four of them began packing their San Francisco apartment. So right now they lived in an apartment, and that's when they started to go on the road a bit more. And Charlie really wanted to go into the recording industry. He wanted to be a musician. That was his whole thing. He wanted to be a rock star. That's all he wanted at this point. Before leaving the Bay Area, where they were at the time, they met Susan Atkins, who was a dark-haired 19-year-old ex-stripper, and Susan soon joined everyone else on the bus. So Susan Atkins is probably one of the, other than Tex, she is probably one of the most known out of the Manson family. Her name is quite prominent. Like, everyone if anyone knows anything about the Manson family, they'll know who Susan Atkins is. So Susan Atkins was born on the 7th of May 1948 in San Gabriel, California. She was of English, Irish, Scottish, and German descent. She's definitely one of those people that likes to just constantly say that she's like fully European when she's not. The second of 3 children, she grew up in Northern California. According to Atkins, her parents, Jean and Edward John Atkins, were alcoholics. Her mother died of cancer in 1964, sadly. And over the next 3 years, Susan's life was disrupted by the gradual breakup of her family, frequent relocations, and her leaving home to live independently. She also later claimed that she was sexually abused by a male relative, but it is not confirmed on who that is. Until she was 13 years old, Atkins and her family lived in a middle-class home in the Cambrian Park area of San Jose, California. She was described by those who knew her as a quiet, self-conscious girl who belonged to her school's glee club and local church choir. She was very normal. So 2 weeks after her mother was hospitalized before she died, Susan arranged for members of the church choir to sing Christmas carols underneath her bedroom window. So she was a very sweet girl. After her mum died, relatives were asked to help look after Susan and her 2 brothers, and she was only 15 at this point. Edward Atkins eventually moved to Los Banos, California, with Susan and her younger brother Stephen, where he found work on the San Luis Dam construction project. Edward left the 2 children behind to fend for themselves, and Susan took a job during her junior year of high school to support her and Stephen. She had also been a above average student at Lee High School in San Jose, but her grades did deteriorate like everyone else's in the family when she went to the high school. During this time, she lived with various relatives. She ended up going out on her own, and she fell in with 2 convicts and participated in several robberies, so her life now has deteriorated massively. She spent a few months in prison in Oregon and performed as a topless dancer to make ends meet. And in 1967, she met Manson when he played guitar at the house where she was living with several friends. She said, "His voice, his manner, just more or less hypnotized me and mesmerized me. He represented a Jesus Christ-like person." So she basically called him her Jesus Christ, really. The house was raided several weeks later by the police, and Atkins was left homeless. This is when Manson invited her to join his group, who were embarking on a man who was creating a fake ID for her at the time. Atkins later claimed to have believed Manson was Jesus. So It's escalating. The growing Manson family settled at Spahn Ranch in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California, where on the 7th of October 1968, Atkins had a son by Bruce White, who was a Manson family member. Manson also called the baby Zizos Zad Frank Glutz. Okay. But I'm baffled by the name, I'm sorry. One thing that is noted is that it's a name, isn't it? It's a name. When the murders happened, after that, she had no contact with her son. She wasn't allowed to, or she just did not want to. Probably better off. The kid was probably better off. Manson says he actually remembers Susan being at the house when he first met her. He said, Susan introduced herself to me saying how much she loved listening to my music. A few minutes later, we were in her room making love. I hate that term. I hate it. I'm sorry if you do prefer it. I just don't like it. Charles Manson changed her name from Susan Atkins to Sadie Mae Glutz to kill her ego, apparently. He gave every member of his family a nickname / name change. So one thing you will notice throughout this, I will end up calling them by their nicknames because that is what they've been referred to by, or I will call them by their actual names. If it gets confusing, I apologize. I'll try and remember. So Manson, Mary, Lynn, Pat and Susan spent early December in Las Vegas, apparently. They then drove to Arizona, New Mexico, and arrived in El Paso on the 6th of December. They spent a week in New Mexico, then a week in Mississippi and Alabama, visiting Pat's parents. I keep getting messages. Oh, I got a message from Auntie Lorraine. Oh, yay. Okay, Mike's gonna be here just before 3. That works. He can be here to make the cookie. Yay. Okay, so when they got back to California 2 days after Christmas, the black school bus that they had broke down in Winslow, Arizona. Pat offered a gas card to cover the repairs, and they panhandled for cash or sang songs together in coffee shops for their meals, so that it was getting a bit rougher to live at this point. By New Year's, Charlie wanted to settle down near Hollywood to pursue his music dreams, plus Mary Brunner was pregnant at the time, and she was due in the spring, so they're trying to find a decent place to be. As Charlie and the women settled in Los Angeles, they traded their lifestyle for one more closely resembling a commune. The women, now including 2 women called Ella Jo Bailey and 14-year-old Diane Lake, were essentially sister wives, expected to get along with one another while doing Manson's bidding. So basically, he was the king and they were his... Like, they just did everything that he did, which, fuck that. But that's what they did. That was their lives. So basically the older women, like Mary, for instance, took more of a maternal role with the younger girls. So Mary would be very much a mother to everyone. Charlie was the dad, Mary was the mother, basically, of the group. Hello, how you doing? Thank you so much. I have an ad. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. It happens. It will be gone soon. It will leave. You can't obviously hear me. Jesus, what am I doing? So, in the spring of 1968, Charlie and Mary's son was born. He's gone, hello Emerald, how you doing? Thank you so much for saying happy birthday. Apologies for the ad. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream. Birthday, 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 birthday. Where is my bubbles? I don't know where my bubbles have gone. Where's my bubbles gone? Bubbles. Bubbles everywhere. I'm doing well, thank you. How about you? I'm doing good. We're having fun today. This is a fun stream. Can't tell I've got bubble marks on the camera or not. So a few weeks after the baby was born, Charlie and his growing family were arrested for public indecency. Basically, the bus had broken down and they were all found by the police, and they were all naked when they were found, and it was basically full on exposed to everyone who walked past. So eventually they met, as we all talk about, Dennis Wilson. If you're not aware who Dennis Wilson was the drummer of the band The Beach Boys. What is going on? Well, what's happened? So on basically a day in spring, following morning at the beach, Patricia and Ella were hitchhiking on the Sunset Strip. When they were hitchhiking, a nice car came by with a rugged, good-looking guy. He pulled up and invited the women in, and they said they were going to Topanga Canyon. He asked them, "Before I drop you off, do you want to come by my house for a visit?" This guy was Dennis Wilson, by the way. They agreed, and he drove them to an upscale home in the basically in the Hollywood Hills, basically. The three of them ate together in the kitchen. They were eating cookies with milk, and then they went to his bedroom and had sex. Finally, he introduced himself. His name was Dennis Wilson, and he was the drummer of the Beach Boys. After an hour, Dennis said that he needed to go to a recording session, but he told the women they were free to stay as long as they wanted. When he came home at 3 a.m, Dennis saw a black school bus parked in the driveway and the lights on his house. He opened the door and was greeted by Charles Manson. Charlie was grinning apparently like a lunatic. Ooh, pronoun check, she, her. So yeah, Charlie was grinning like a lunatic. Dennis actually got quite scared of him. I would be scared if Charles Manson was just like in my face grinning like a lunatic, to be fair. And he asked Charlie, are you planning to hurt me? Are you planning to kill me? You're robbing me? What are you doing? Charlie told him that he didn't mean to harm him. And the way he proved this was by getting down on his knees and kissing his feet. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not like any fucker kissing my feet. It's weird. It's really fucking weird. Yeah, no, you'd be terrified, wouldn't you? Like, you'd be like, what the fuck is going on? Kiss those feet. Yeah, kiss those feet. Do it. Ugh. Gross. So when Dennis actually properly got in the house, he just found like a dozen people having a party. Most of them being women. Hey, Pastel. Yeah, no, it's gross, isn't it? Pat and Ella rushed over to introduce him to Charlie, and Charlie basically told them to take their role on the bed. Dennis soon discovered both Charlie's musical talents and counterculture philosophies. He became a big fan of him and actually allowed the family to stay at his home. Yeah, I know. I know. It's fucking gross. So he let the family just stay at his home while encouraging... so basically he would get his friends, which were talent agents Greg Jacobson and Columbia Records producer Terry Melcher, to support Manson's music dreams. Now, you probably might recognize the name Columbia Records. Columbia Records is a very, very big recording company in LA that has, currently to this day, has a lot of the most famous artists on the planet signed to it. People like Beyonce... I'm pretty sure you got BTS being signed by them, Drake, people like that. Basically some of the best artists on the planet. Harry Styles is even signed by them. And they were going to sign Charles Manson. That is very weird to think about, isn't it? So Charlie realized that he didn't want everyone to stay in Wilson's house, and he didn't want to basically ruin the possibility of him getting a record label. To be fair, if they would have given Charlie a record label, none of the murders would have happened. None of it would have happened, and we will get into that. Jack Mexican, yeah, I actually kind of do. Also, a lot of the songs are pretty good, but yeah, the reasons why the murders do happen is because he didn't get a record label, which we will definitely go into more detail on. So he realised that he couldn't stay in Dennis Wilson's good graces if the family stayed at his home. Fair enough. So especially with a new baby around. So he sent Mary, the baby, and several women to Mendocino County. They were able to stay a couple months there and recruit as many young people as they possibly could. So basically adding more to the family whilst not being in the house. As the girls left Frisco, they scored some wicked acid and grass, apparently. Charlie decided to move the rest of the family out of Wilson's estate so he could keep the relationship with the drummer. He made arrangements to relocate everyone to Spahn Ranch, which was a 500-acre property in Chatsworth, and it was a former film set that was mostly used for like Western films and Western TV shows. If you've watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that is you do see Spahn Ranch on there. If you can't tell, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is about Charles Manson. Hello, motherfucker. So, with Spahn Ranch, so basically Spahn Ranch, the reason why they got to stay there is because the owner at the time, George Spahn, he was about 80 years old and he was very withered, he was blind and everything. The ranch hands told him about a school bus full of hippies that were camped out in the woods nearby, and a few days later he heard the sound of singing from inside the rundown house where he lived. He heard a tap at the screen door. When he got up to the door, a bunch of women were basically there, and they asked if they could crash there for a few days, and he basically agreed, like, okay, you're lost, you can stay here for a few days. And over those few days, they ended up just trying to butter him up to help them stay there longer. So they would cook his food for him, they would tidy things up for him, they'd do a lot of the housework, making sure that he was well taken care of. They made sure they laughed at everything that he said, they treated him well. They let him do whatever they wanted to them. So basically, if he wanted to cop a field, they would let him do it in order to stay in his good graces. I'm sorry, I have no control over it. Sometimes George asked the ranch hands what Charlie and the girls were really doing. They said that Charlie mostly just sat under a tree for hours playing his guitar, and the girls brought food and water to him. Basically, just, took care of him. He said that the women all adored Charlie, and which the Wranglers couldn't understand, actually. The Wranglers said that Manson was small and not very handsome. It was just a mess. So they couldn't understand what was going on. But they said that the women made Charlie's clothes for him. They rubbed his feet, which is disgusting. They also had there was a lot of sex going on, a lot of orgies going on, to say the least. So eventually the girls just became a constant presence at the ranch and in his home. The girls liked to paint. They made oil portraits of George with his favourite horses. They decided to stay overnight with him. A lot of things started happening. On the 22nd of June, the women who went to... the women who Charlie sent away, like Mary and everyone, they were all arrested. They befriended basically a bunch of teenage boys in the neighborhood where they were staying. Started cozying up to them. Started sharing drugs. They started to spread diseases around as well. And one of the boys had a really bad acid trip and freaked out, and his mother called the police. Hello, motherfucker. They all got arrested, and eventually police found a lot of acid with them. Mary was arrested for possession of narcotics. Patricia, Sadie, Yella, and Stephanie were arrested for sex work. By the end of July, Pat, Sadie, and Stephanie were still in jail. One of them, Yella, was released because she was having surgery, and Charlie then decided that we need to get the girls out, we need to get them to Spahn Ranch, we need to bring the family back together. They all got out of jail on the 16th of August of that year, and this is eventually when they met Bob. This is when Bobby became a bit more of a figure in the group. There isn't much on Bobby, by all accounts. Bobby would only be convicted of one murder eventually, connected to the Manson family. So he was born on the 6th of November 1947 in Santa Barbara in California to working class parents Charles Kenneth Briosoli and Helen Arlene Mattox. He was the firstborn child in a large Catholic family. He had 4 siblings, and when he was 15, he was sent to a boys' camp for 10 months for running away from home and for doing a series of juvenile pranks. Bit extreme, but okay. After he left the camp, Bobby moved to the Los Angeles area and drifted between there and San Francisco, gravitating towards the emerging counterculture music scene and acting. He became a member of several rock bands beginning about in 1965, including the Orchestra, the Milky Way, and the Grassroots. A lot of the members from them eventually became the band Love. In 1967, he met Kenneth Anger and secured a part in Anger's film Lucifer Rising. So Bobby had pretty a lot of good stuff going for him. In 1968, he was living with a friend called Gary Hinman in Topanga Canyon, where he met Charles Manson and became associated with him and the Manson family. Gary Hinman we will come back to eventually, because obviously the stuff doesn't go well for Gary. Back at Spahn Ranch, the class order was shaken between the women and the Manson family. Basically, Charlie had his front street girls, pretty girls who used to lure men to the family, and his backstreet girls who were useful for their work and their loyalty to him. Patricia was a backstreet girl. She was a designated mother, pretty much. She cooked, she did the laundry and the ironing, she took care of the children, though she didn't have a child of her own. So basically, she was like second mother next to Mary, if anything. The women were paired up in a buddy system that reflected those that basically based on their age and how experienced they were in sex work. Pat, who was now nicknamed Katie, so she went by Katie, she no longer went by her actual name, was also encouraged to take on a big sister role with one of the younger girls, Diane. She was one of the more codependent family members, despite a need for love and validation. Charlie kind of sensed the loneliness that resided in her and basically not hypnotized her, but led her to believe that she was something to him when she wasn't, which is really sad. LSD is a very big section to talk about. So LSD became a very critical part of how Manson broke each of his followers and made them obey everything that he said and do everything that he said. Same thing. It was a vital thing in their spiritual, social, and sexual life, apparently. So basically, if you don't know, LSD is effective with switching off the neutrons in the brain that controls behavior patterns. So we're going to go into what LSD basically is. Never done it. Put my hands up now. Never have done. After reading this, don't ever want to. Normally, so basically the human brain, as humans, we have emotional connections to our belief system. They are wedded into our past experiences, and basically those who demonstrated them to us at primal ages, we feel guilty. We feel guilty under normal circumstances, throwing away those beliefs. But under LSD, the feelings of guilt can be removed. But when you break down when you break down, it is the purpose of filling the space of something with something new. So it gets rid of those emotions and fills it with something else. And that's what he did to his followers. He would give them LSD, their old beliefs would break down, their brains would become kind of numb, and he would fill their brains with his beliefs and everything that he wanted, which is why they followed everything that he did in the end, because it's very weird to think how you could believe anything that he said was true and good, but the reason why they believed everything is pretty much just because he gave them so much LSD, he broke their brains down. Charlie conducted a lot of the orgies. Everyone would lie on the floor of the saloon with a record player being gone in the background. Charlie placed a tab or capsule of acid on each person's tongue, reserving a smaller dose for himself so that he could maintain and orchestrate the events. So he would always take a lot less than everyone else. In the summer of 1968, the family's central belief system had been systematically put in place by Manson himself, from ridding themselves of old ideas that wedded them to their birth families, to the use of acid to erase sexual phobias and prudishness. Charlie became not just a father figure, but chief spiritual leader of the family. So now, by 1968, the family, everyone had just completely changed who they were before. He started to talk about escaping. His number one choice of destination was always the desert. This is when they met Catherine Gillis. She was 17 years old. She grew up in the area in Orange County, and Spahn nicknamed her, basically George Spahn nicknamed her Capistro, I guess in. But the family actually shortened it to Cappy. That's a lot better. Within a week, Manson learned that Cappy's grandmother owned a ranch in Death Valley and tried to basically get answers from her about it. On the 7th of October, Sadie gave birth to a baby boy, who was 2 months premature by all accounts. With another crying baby underfoot, Charlie knew he tested George Spahn's hospitality too far. And by mid-October, it was decided that the family would leave for Death Valley, and they ended up leaving on Halloween night, actually. But the visit to Myers Ranch was cut short when Cappy admitted that she didn't actually have permission to stay there. So Charlie and Paul went to Barilla and asked about other properties. Someone told them about a nearby Barker Ranch, and Manson contacted the owner and gave her one of Dennis Wilson's gold records and got permission for the family to stay there. Fair enough. So at this point, it's still it's fucked up, but it's not as bad at this point. So, one November day in the desert, Manson grew aggravated with his followers and he left them, planning to actually just leave them completely. But he hitchhiked toward the mountains only to get incredibly hot and tired and thirsty and more frustrated. So he laid down in the desert and then he just got really tired of it and went back to them very quickly. So he gave up very, very quickly. He planned to focus again on his music career and to get Dennis Wilson, Greg Jacobson and Terry Melcher invested in his recording career, so he started to work on that again. He had what is believed to be an acid-induced vision while listening to the Beatles' White Album. He saw the world in flames amid a global race war between black and white people. He believed that black people would win the war, but ultimately him and his family would take over to rule the planet. He would then later call this vision Helter Skelter after the 23rd track on the album. You probably might have heard the song Helter Skelter by the Beatles. If you've not heard the one by the Beatles, you probably would have heard the Motley Crue cover. At least. I think everyone's heard the song Helter Skelter, or versions of it, at least. For Manson, Helter Skelter didn't just cement an existing theory that a racial catalysm was on its way. It validated an internal belief system that he was destined for greatness. I literally bought Helter Skelter ice lollies today. Yeah, I know the White Album very well. Nice, you've got good taste. So basically, he thought that he was destined for greatness. However, his personality started to shift a lot more. So if you've ever seen an interview with him when he's acting really, really crazy, this is when it started to happen. So basically in the winter, it got a lot worse. He started to dole out on drugs a lot more to control the others. He began to take more drugs himself. He got meaner, he got more brutal, he got more controlling. The charming aspect of him that brought the girls in started to go away. And he started to become a lot more horrible. So the way he brought everyone in 1967 completely took a whole switch. So he was no longer gentle. He just was completely different. He had a way of blaming other people for the way his life turned out, from his mother, the prisons, and his ex-wives. Now, his mother I can kind of understand, because, yeah, she ditched him when he was a newborn for a pitcher of beer. So I can kind of understand his reasoning for that one. The prisons, 100% were definitely a reason for why he turned out that way. I think the sheer amount of abuse and sexual abuse that he got in the prisons changed the way he looked at life, so that I can fully agree with. But his ex-wives did fuck all. Like, it wasn't their fault you kept breaking the law and going to prison and leaving them when they had to raise your child on their own. You can't blame the wives for that thing. I mean, anyone would do that because you're an idiot. You're a fucking piece of shit that was going to ditch anyway, Charlie. Anyway. So, the brunt of his attacks, so basically the people that got the most amount of abuse in the family was Mary, Katie, Sadie, Snake, and Mary was beaten quite a lot by him. She was beaten so badly a lot of the time that she couldn't get out of bed for quite a few days. Snake was punched, kicked, and hit over the head with a chair and whipped with an electrical cord quite a lot. Pat is quoted on saying years later, I remember he began to do things like grab me by the hip. I remember when I laughed at him once and he jerked me by the hair and said, you won't ever laugh at me again. When we were out in the woods, he threw knives over my head. He threw hatchets over my head into a tree. He at times he'd give me to other people to use for sex. The idea was to let you know that he always had that control. Between the drugs and the violence and my inability to make the correct decisions and to take my own life, get some self-respect and leave, I just didn't. Which is so sad to think about, because he was obviously fueling them with drugs constantly, so they just didn't have that ability in their brains to get up and leave. The family was bursting at the seams at the park where they lived in, and Charlie sent Squeaky to Spartan Ranch in February to cozy up with George and convince him to let them come back, but the ranch had apparently changed, and so had Charlie. Obviously, Charlie had changed. He would take the kids on what he would, because obviously there was a lot of kids that lived on the ranch. Either the women had the baby, had the children with other male members of the family, or they would have the kids with Charlie. He would take the kids on what he called creepy crawls, which is where he would let them wear black clothes. We'd put black clothes on them, get into a car, and do what he called a creepy crawl, which meant that they snuck into someone's houses and moved things around. They didn't really steal anything. He wanted to just scare the people who lived at the homes, which is so weird. In the summer of 1969, summer of 69, June, Steve Grogan was 18 years old, Leslie Van Houten was 19, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Bobby were all 21. Tex was 23, Mary Brunner was 25, and Bruce Davis was 26. None of these people had ever committed any acts of violence before this year. Like, they had not done anything before this. On the 1st of July, Tex Watson basically took $2,500 from a drug dealer, which set off a chain reaction of catastrophe and death. Manson began to talk about helter-skelter a lot more, his belief that a violent global war between the races was coming. He was relying upon the talents of Straight Satans, which was an outlaw biker gang that had been spending time at the ranch with them. He believed that the bikers would be his army when it was time to escape the desert. Obviously, they did not feel the same way. But Bobby actually jeopardized the relationship when he got a deal to sell mescaline to the Straight Satans, a deal that resulted in the murder of his friend Gary Hinman. So now we're going to be going into the first murder that would be associated with the Manson family. Now, this murder was an accident by all accounts. This was not meant to happen. But it is the first one connected to Charles Manson. So Gary Hinman, as I mentioned, was Bobby's closest friend at the time when he met Charles, and he was forever his closest friend up until Gary died. So in 1969, just a few weeks before, this is literally weeks before the main murders that everyone knows about from the Manson family. So we're getting into The things that we all know what happened. So in 1969, just a few weeks before the infamous Tate LaBlanca murders, Manson ordered his follower Bobby to kill his friend Gary Hinman in an act which would propel the family past the point of no return into the darkest depth of humanity. So obviously Bobby didn't want to do this. It wasn't going to happen until last minute. This was not something that was planned out like the Tate and the LaBianca ones, sorry. So, 34-year-old musician Gary Hinman escalated the Manson family from a borderline creepy group of free-loving young people to a crazed collection of mindless mass murderers. Gary Hinman, he was born in 1934 on Christmas Eve in Colorado. He studied at the University of California in Los Angeles, graduating with a degree in chemistry and continuing his education by pursuing a PhD in sociology. So Gary Hinman was a very intelligent guy. He had a very bright future ahead of him. He was also a talented musician. He worked at a music shop and taught the bagpipes, the drums, the piano, and the trombone. He was a very, very talented guy. And he somehow managed to establish a mescaline factory in his basement. Added hobby. So during the summer of 69, I'm going to make that joke a lot, he became involved in Buddhism and began planning a pilgrimage to Japan to fulfill his new faith. Fair enough. Tragically, this obviously would never happen. So in the summer of 1966 was when he met Charlie and he met Bobby. Bobby said in an interview in 1981 that he didn't go there with the intention of killing Gary. He was going there for one purpose only, which was to collect $1,000 that I'd already turned over to him that didn't belong to me. He was going there to collect the money. He was not going there to kill him. But Manson believed that Gary was sitting on a lot more money than he said he had. He believed that he had an inheritance of $20,000, and so he believed that he had a lot of money which he invested into his house and cars. On the 25th of July, so literally in 2 days, it would have been, God knows, I have to figure that out. But Manson ordered Bobby to go over to his house with the intention of scaring him out of his $20,000. Bobby was joined by Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner, who were rumoured to have slept with Gary in the past. When asking for the money, Hinman admitted that he didn't have any. In fact, he didn't even own his house and cars, as was speculated. Bobby got really frustrated and he roughed him up, thinking that he was lying, which it seemed unlikely that he was, so Bobby called for backup. And the next day, whilst at the house, Charles Manson arrived at the house along with Bruce Davis, and after Bobby told Manson that there was no money, Manson got out a samurai sword and sliced Gary's ear and cheek. At that point, Bobby claimed that the horror had set in for him, and he was confronted with Manson's and he realised Manson had a disgusting need for blood. That's what he said. And he asked Manson why he'd hurt Gary like this, and Manson just said, "To show you how to be a man," which makes no fucking sense. Unbothered by this, Manson and Davis took off in one of Hinman's cars, leaving a panicked Bobby alone with an injured Gary and with Susan and Mary. They did all three of them did the best that they could do to clean up Gary, using dental floss to stitch up his wounds. Gary seemed dazed and kept insisting that he didn't believe in violence and simply wanted everyone to leave his home. Despite the fact that Hinman's wounds were under control, Bobby continued to become agitated, believing that there's no way out of this. Bobby is quoted on saying, I knew if I took him to the emergency room, I'd end up going to prison. Gary would tell on me for sure, and he would tell on Charlie and everyone else. This was when I realised there was no way out. After wondering what to do next, and speaking to Manson several times, Bobby decided the only thing to do was to kill Gary. The words "political piggy" was written in Gary's blood across his wall, and Bobby also drew a paw print on the wall in his blood in an attempt to convince the police that the Black Panthers had been involved, to basically lose trace on who actually committed the murders. But according to the San Diego Union Tribune, which reported on the murders originally, Hinman was tortured for apparently several days before ultimately being stabbed to death. So The only accounts we've got is what the Tribune posted and also what Bobby said happened. But there is a possibility that Bobby would have lied to make it not seem as bad. But obviously, what happened to Gary's body is obvious. You can't say that he didn't do half the stuff. I'm trying to get comfy on here, but I'm literally just sat on the floor. So after Gary's murder, family members Ella Jo Bailey and William Cole left. They asked Pat to come with them, but she actually declined because she was afraid that Charlie would track her down and kill her. Days later, Gary's body was found by friends, and Charlie fled to Smarn Ranch. He was back on the 8th of August and learned that Bobby had been arrested, for Gary's murder, so literally not too long before the murders actually happened, Bobby was arrested. Knowing that Bobby would eventually place him at the scene of the crime, Manson decided to create a diversion, and he told everyone that Helter Skelter was coming down that very night. That evening, Charlie gathered Tex, Sadie, Katie, and Linda Kasabian, basically Susan Atkins, Pat, and Linda, and ordered Tex to take them to the former home of record producer Terry Melcher and to kill everyone there. Now, so basically what happened, the reason why he told them to go to this house is because Charlie went to many recording sessions to try and get this record deal, and Terry just said that he wasn't right. He didn't have the right sound, he wasn't good enough to be a professional musician to have a record label. And Charlie had it in his mind that they'd signed a mental contract which said that he would get a record deal, and it just didn't end up happening. So he got really, really pissed off, and he went to the house of Terry to talk to him about it, only to find out that Terry had moved out of the house, and the people now living there were Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate. And this is when he told Tex to take the girls to the house, kill everyone there, and he told all the other girls, do whatever Tex tells you to do. Don't disobey him, do what he says. And to also leave something witchy on the walls. So now we're going to go into the Tate murders. So Pat was selected for the murders by Charlie for her loyalty, apparently. Manson knew how dependent she was on him. In light of her recent attempts to leave, he needed to remind her that she belonged to him. Pat says that Manson came into a trailer where I was taking care of the children, and he told me to come out. When I came up at the front of the ranch, there was a car, and Tex was there, and Susan Atkins and Linda Kasabian. Charlie told me to go with Tex and do whatever he said. So Tex, Susan, Linda, and Pat climbed into the four-door Ford owned by one of the ranch hands, and Watson and Kasabian were in the front seat. Atkins and Krenwinkel were in the back. So film actress Sharon Tate and her husband, Polish film director, who is very much still known to this day, but also he's not the best guy, Roman Polanski, were currently renting... Hello! They were renting their house on Celio Drive in the summer of 1969. Sorry. You're getting a cider.
I'm dying. I need a second.
So is it negative?
Yeah, it came back negative.
You've probably just got a cold or something.
Yeah. I'm sick. It's when you follow up with boo, you whore.
Boo, you whore.
That's bad.
So, at the time, Sharon was 8 months pregnant, and Roman Polanski was overseas working on a film project, so she had a couple of house guests over. I don't know why you did that.
I'm attacking you.
There's one person whose name I'm going to really struggle with trying to say. So, she had two house guests, Abigail Folger and Abigail's boyfriend. Oh god, this name is going to kill me.
Where is it? Good luck.
Yeah. Wojciech, I'm going to say Wojciech Frykowski. I'm just going to say his last name, Frykowski. That evening, her ex-boyfriend and hairstylist J. Sebring was also there. All of them were savagely murdered that night, and the first person to die at the house was Stephen Parent. Now, Stephen Parent was actually visiting the caretaker, and he was just leaving the property when everyone turned up. So Atkins and Krenwinkel broke into the main house, leaving Kasabian to stay at the gate as a getaway and a lookout. J. Sebring, Abigail, Frykowski and Sharon were made to gather in the living room. Tate and Sharon and Jay were linked by a rope tied around their necks. Sebring was also, and Jay was shot and stabbed to death. Frykowski and Folger managed to free themselves and run away from the house, but both of them were chased down and killed by Pat and Tex. Pat even recalls when she was killing Abigail, she said that when Pat was stabbing Abigail had enough in her to just say, "I'm already dead, just stop," because it was too far at this point. Finally, Susan Atkins and Tex stabbed Sharon Tate as they left the house, and Susan used Sharon's blood to write the word pig on the front door. The next set of murders were the La Bianca murders, which was on the next day. So on the 9th of August 1969, Leno and Rosemary La Bianca had been vacationing for the day at Lake Isabella and returned home the night after the Tate murders. They were last seen alive when they stopped on their way home to buy fuel. Rosemary had brought a newspaper and on the front page it had the details of the murders of Sharon Tate, and it had obviously Roman Polanski's reaction to the murders on the front page. The attendant testified later on that Rosemary particularly had been very concerned and anxious as she read about the murders, and she discussed this with the person that she bought the newspaper from. The following night, Manson took Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Kasabian, as well as Leslie Van Houten and Stephen Clem Grogan, in search of more people to murder. Manson selected the Los Angeles home of grocery store executive Leno Bianca and his wife Rosemary. After Manson and Watson tied the couple together, Manson left with Susan Atkins. So this is really weird to think that he didn't actually kill anyone. He's the reason why they died, but he didn't actually be the one to do the stabbings and do whatever, which is very weird to think about. He left with Susan, Kasabian, and Grogan, and Watson, Van Houten, and Krenwinkel remained and acted on the murders in Manson's orders. They stabbed the couple to death, again leaving the words written in blood on the walls. Now the thing is, Van Houten actually hadn't done anything when the stabbings originally started, but because she hadn't done anything, Tex gave her the knife and said, "Do something." So she stabbed Rosemary, and they could hear Rosemary's husband being murdered in the other room when Tex dragged him in and made them be next to each other when they died, which is so sad to think about. So yeah, she stabbed Rosemary, which was the stabbing that finished the job, essentially. The next night, on the 10th of August 1969, Rosemary's 15-year-old son Frank became concerned when neither his mother or stepfather answered the door. After contacting his older sister Suzanne and her boyfriend, the three of them went to the home to see what was going on, and became even more worried to see that they had the car parked in the driveway and no one was answering. So they entered the home, and inside the kitchen they saw the words "Helter Skelter" written in blood on the front of the refrigerator. In the living room, they found Leno bound and gagged and stabbed to death, and Rosemary was found also stabbed to death. The crimes created panic in Los Angeles, especially with how horrific they were, obviously. On the 16th of August, Spahn Ranch was raided by multiple law enforcement agencies related to matters dealing with auto theft. Everyone was arrested and thrown into custody, but 2 days later they were freed when the judge determined the arrest warrants were misdated. A few days after his release, Charlie was arrested on suspicion of marijuana possession and held for several days, and he was irate upon his return and believed that Spahn Ranch hand Shorty She had turned him in. In retaliation, he ordered several of his followers, Tex Watson, Stephen Grogan, Bruce Davis, William Cole, and Larry Bailey, to kill Shea. Days later, the family fled back to Barker Ranch in Death Valley. So a lot of things are escalating. He knows that he's going to get caught very, very soon. At the end of September, the Manson family hastened their demise by committing an act of arson on a piece of earth-moving equipment blocking their access to Death Valley National Park. They torched the mover, but law enforcement was soon hot on their heels. And at 4 a.m. on Friday, the 10th of October, law enforcement converged around Barker Ranch. They included the California Highway Patrol and the County Sheriff's Office and the National Park Service. Before dawn, the officers snuck onto the property in the house, and officers found 6 women, Squeaky, Katie, Sadie, Gypsy, Leslie, and Little Patty, and the police continued to nearby Myers Ranch and arrested 4 more Manson family women and detained 2 of the children. Poor kids. Others were arrested over a 3-day period, and Bobby's pregnant girlfriend was among those arrested and then immediately transported back to the Los Angeles area to speak with investigators for Gary Hinman's murder. Kitty told detectives that she believed 2 or 3 women were with Bobby when he stabbed Gary. She named Susan Atkins when the 2 investigators drove back to Independence to talk to Sadie. She had basically the entire story to tell them. On the 23rd of October, Katie flew to Alabama. There, she was interviewed by local police about Shorty's murder. She named Manson, Clem, Bruce, and maybe Tex as the perpetrators. She admitted that the women helped to cover up Shea's murder, but didn't volunteer anything about her activities on the 9th and 10th of August. So at this point, all of them had been arrested, and the trials eventually began in the January. Well, they got arrested in January, and the trials began on the 9th of June 1970. Now, you might have seen a few clips here or there about the trials, basically. They were a bit odd, to say the least. So on the 9th of June 1970, Manson, Susan, Patricia, and Leslie were called before the court for their hearing. Charlie dramatically turned his chair away from the judge, claiming that since the court didn't respect him, then he had no respect for the court. And the following day, Susan, Pat, and Leslie stood and turned their backs to the judge like Charlie did. And this is when they figured out in 1970 that they were all kind of still in contact with each other and speaking, and whenever Charlie told them to do something, they'd do it during the trial, such as at one point carving an X into their foreheads. Which eventually later on in life Charlie would go over it in prison and tattoo a swastika on his forehead. They also shaved their heads for it as well. And on the 25th of January, Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were convicted of first-degree murder. And obviously, so were family members such as Tex as well. When they were originally they were sentenced to death. This eventually gets overturned as the death penalty is no longer a part in California. And Patricia said when they got sentenced, Patricia said, "You have just judged yourselves." Susan says, "Better lock your doors and watch your own kids." And Leslie Van Houten says, "Your whole system is a game. You blind, stupid people. Your children will turn against you." So yeah, originally in April they were sentenced to death by electrocution. At the time, no death row for female prisoners existed in California, so a special unit was built at the California Institute for Women, and that was where they were at first, because there wasn't really a death penalty for women at the time. But obviously they were given the same crimes as the men, so. But on the 18th of February 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled the death penalty was unconstitutional, and the ruling was not unexpected. So it got changed from a death penalty to life in prison instead. So now we've got like a little bit of a timeline on what happened after they were put in prison. So like in October 1975, Pat, Susan, and Leslie were moved from the special security wing where they were at in prison, where they were initially sentenced to death. So they were moved from there. After 4 years of being in prison, Pat was beginning to question Manson's authority. So after a good few years in prison, they started to realize everything that he taught them, everything that he told them wasn't right. They started to now realize how bad everything was. In 1976, attorneys for Pat, Susan, and Leslie began to review their files. In 1977, Pat was in a relationship with another female inmate. She continued to drink and abuse drugs within the prison system. In August of that year, she got drunk and was sick for several days. And after this, she got clean, and her girlfriend was paroled in the early 80s. In the mid-80s, Pat was treated for her hormone imbalance troubles that she's had since she was a child, and she was prescribed medicine for them, so she started to get a bit better. In 1987, Kenny was a nickname for one of her fellow inmates, received correspondence from a woman named Judy Hanson, who was a researcher secretly working for Doris Tate, which was Sharon's mother, to basically get more stuff about the girls and their life stories. In 2000, the girls decided to turn back to their Christian faiths, and very recently, in 2021, this year, Pat is currently the longest-serving female inmate in the California criminal justice system. She has rarely sat for interviews, but spoke candidly on those occasions. At times, she has taken full responsibility for her role in the murders, and other times, she has not taken accountability as well, such as in her 2017 bid for a recognised victim of domestic abuse. Now, since we're coming up to the end of it, it's been a good 3 hours we've been talking about this now. Yeah, about a good 3 hours. So, a little bit of an update on how the known members of the Manson family are doing. Leslie Van Houten is now 71 years old. She is still in prison, and she was recently denied parole. She did get married to William Sivin in 1982, but they got divorced the same year. Susan Atkins. Thank you so much. Brigada 13. Thank you so much for the bits. Thank you. How are you doing, my friend? We're just finishing up on Charles Manson. Thank you so much. Technically, we're going to class that as a little thing. We'll do a little shot for that one, because we're going on to midday, so why the fuck not? That's not my one. This one's my one. Happy birthday to me. No one can tell me apple sours isn't the best one. Well, thank you so much. So, Susan Atkins died at the age of 61 in prison on the 24th of September 2009 from, by all accounts, natural causes. She did get married during her time in prison, once to James W. Whitehouse from 1987 to 2009, but her first marriage was to Donald Lee Leisure from 1981 to 1982. She had a fucking long marriage, didn't she? Charles Tex Watson is still in prison. He did get married to Christian Joan Sevega in 1979, but they got divorced in 2003. He is currently 75 years old. Linda Kasabian, even though being involved with the murders, was not sentenced due to being a witness and naming the family members. And in 2009, she gave an interview about the crimes and said for the past 12 years, she's been on a path of healing and rehabilitation, and she is now 72 years old. Charles Manson lived out the rest of his life in prison, and he died on the 19th of November 2017, so not that long ago, in Bakersfield, California, from cardiac arrest, resulting from respiratory failure and colon cancer in hospital. He was 83 years old when he died. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Squeaky Fromm, however, is the only Manson family member to be granted parole. She was released in 2009 and is now currently 72 years old. Thank you for the 100 bits. Thank you so much. Birthday, birthday, birthday. Where's my thing? Thank you! Birthday, 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 birthday. We're gonna make a cookie in a minute. So Squeaky Fromm, yeah, she got released in 2009. She's 72 years old, but apparently, now this is really fucked up, the fact that every other Manson family member is still in prison, and they all can't stand him anymore. They want nothing to do with him. They don't believe any of the things that he taught them anymore. They are, by all accounts, they have remorse for everything that they did. However, Squeaky doesn't. Squeaky got released, however, because she didn't really technically kill anyone. But thank you for the follow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brigada. But apparently she still supports Charles Manson, and she is apparently still in love with him. She wasn't arrested. She was in prison, but she wasn't arrested for the Manson murders because she actually didn't do them. But, however, she was arrested. The reason why Squeaky was in prison was because she attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford at the time. So, Squeaky, get your shit together, love. You need to have a good long look in the mirror, sweetheart, because you're clearly a bit tapped, to say the fucking least. But yeah, that was Charles Manson and the Manson family, everyone. Thank you for listening to True Crime Fridays. We're still carrying on. We are on hour 5. We're on about hour 5 of our birthday stream. And we are currently... Thank you, it was interesting. No problem, Pastel. I hope you all enjoyed it.